All right. This is Dr. Rock here on 69 AM The One. And I just dropped by to kind of hang out at the station, and I got recruited to do an interview with Katie Linehan.
Hi, Katie Linehan here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, you're here to talk about what?
I am here to talk about high-quality education for every child and focusing on the city of Omaha. And just as a disclaimer, I am a volunteer. I'm not being paid by anyone to do this and not doing it on behalf of my paying job. Just here as a citizen of Omaha, lifelong mostly of Omaha, and current resident in OPS.
Well, there's no question that education is important because the more educated you are, the better chance you have of being something more than what people might expect you to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, education is crucial, and I don't think there's a lot of people who want to argue about that. Everyone believes education is important. What we, and I work with a group called Nebraska Alliance for Quality Education, and what we really advocate is that every single child deserves a high-quality education, and that means they should learn to read by the time they're in third grade. When they graduate from high school, they should be ready for a college or a career. And this is not that unique to Nebraska, but it's becoming more and more unique to Nebraska and Omaha, is acceptance of excuses such as, well, kids in poverty, you know what, they just can't learn, and it's not the school's fault. And so we strongly, strongly reject that notion. And, it's not just because it's wrong on its face. It's because now we have over 20 years of hard evidence of what other states are doing to improve educational outcomes for kids, regardless of how poor they are, regardless of the color of their skin. We are seeing what works in other cities, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, hotbeds for this type of what's called education reform, and it simply has not penetrated Omaha, and that I personally believe is a shame, because there are certainly a lot of kids here who deserve a high quality education who aren't getting the education they deserve today.
Yeah, there is that tendency to say, well, they're from that group or that group, and there's
Poor,
not much
black, Latino,
yeah,
English
there's
language
not
learner.
much we can do for them.
Right.
They're stuck, but that's wrong.
It's absolutely wrong. And people have to start rejecting that notion. And, a lot of people won't until they're pushed a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened last week was remarkable when a group of what seemed like mostly parents and concerned citizens went down to Lincoln and testified on a bill, LB 972. They testified on that bill and said, you know what, our kids aren't getting the type of education they deserve, and we want better. And that specific bill was about something called a charter school, and saying, Omaha, it's time to open your doors and let some charter schools into this city.
I've heard some good things about charter schools in
Mm-hmm.
different places around the country.
Mm-hmm.
The things that they're, the successes that they're having.
Right. Yeah, I mean, charter schools, here's the deal with charter schools. They started 20 plus years ago now. I mean, we're hitting, 20 years ago. And so it was an experiment, right? It was saying, look, we aren't doing a good job of educating all kids, and specifically poor and minority kids. So let's try this. And a lot of people hesitated, and, it's kind of like our learning community here in Omaha. We're failing. Let's try something to improve what's failing. The difference I would suggest between the learning community and charter schools is now we know charter schools work. Not every single one, just like every single McDonald's, it doesn't succeed.
That's
right?
True. That's true.
But the model, the mindset works for kids. And proof. I mean, in the last 10 years, there's been 16 academic studies on do charter schools work, and 15 say yes, they work. One is a little undecisive. So there's that excuse of we don't know if it's going to work, or
Mm-hmm.
and we can go through the excuses if you want, but it's just not acceptable, because the problem is we aren't educating kids. So really where Nebraska Alliance for Quality Ed is coming from. Stop the excuses, start the solutions. It's not about personalities, it's about what's best for kids.
Right. Yeah, you hear stories about kids graduating from high school in various places, and they can't even read the diploma that they've been given.
And that's tragic. And it's not, I do not accept that is the child's fault. That is a failed system.
Absolutely.
Where you don't learn to read, you don't learn to do simple fractions by the time you're in high school, graduate high school. I mean, we have a crisis here, and it gets touchy because people think, oh, they're attacking my school, they're attacking my kid, my teachers, my principal. No, this is about saying, let's all come together and say, look, this works. Let's move towards this. I'm not advocating, and I don't think anyone is saying, shut down all the traditional public schools and open charters. By the way, charter schools are public schools. A lot of people like to say, no, it's private. No, it's public school. But they're one tool in a large tool belt of what needs to happen to improve educational outcomes. And again, I wish I came up with this idea and could say, let's try it and see if it works, but I'm just not that ahead of the game here. This has been going on for decades now across the country, and I would encourage anyone to look and study at the results of the state of Florida. And you may have lived in Florida 20 years ago and you say, well, they don't have as good of education in Nebraska. And you know what? Maybe 20 years ago they didn't. Today, their education system for all kids, rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids, Latino kids, English language learners, all kids are doing better than kids in Nebraska. Why? Because they embraced certain reforms that work for kids. And also, by the way, don't cost millions of dollars more than what we're already spending. We have the money right now in Omaha, in Nebraska, to provide every child with a high-quality education. If it took more money, I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about it. I'd be out trying to raise money. Mm-hmm. If someone said, we just need $10,000 more per kid, I'd go try to raise that money. And they said, then every kid will have a high-quality education. Okay, let's go raise the money. That's just simply not going to work. You have to change policies.
Right.
And you have to, here's the key, raise expectations. Higher expectations for, parents, for the community, for teachers, but most importantly for kids. When kids come into a classroom, and I've been in enough classrooms, I've seen this, and the OPS needs analysis talks about it, and they come in and there's this attitude from the adults that they're in front of, not always teachers, all kinds of adults saying, that poor kid, they're just so dang poor, and their parents work until 1 a.m., or they had to sleep in the bathtub, or they didn't get a good dinner. Yeah, we have to address those issues as a society. I'm certainly not saying ignore that. We got to address that, but don't tell that kid or give them the impression. Kids can read that on an adult. If you give them the impression, okay, I feel bad for you, and I don't think you can overcome the situation you have, so I don't expect you to learn to read. I'm not gonna, say you need to do your math homework, or, if you're having trouble on this math problem, it's because you didn't sleep or eat enough, and it's not really my concern, right? And the problem with that is that child then is not only maybe hungry, whatever else they're dealing with because of poverty, they're also uneducated. So then you have the cyclical problem.
Right.
And, it really is nothing short of a miracle what's happening in some of these schools. Traditional schools, charter schools, private schools, whatever. Some schools are doing fabulous things for kids. And kids from all backgrounds, right? And they are doing fabulous things. And for us to say Omaha doesn't want that here is unacceptable. We don't have any more time to say, we got a new board, great. I was all for the new board. We got a new superintendent, great. It was a long time for us to get a new superintendent. That doesn't mean we can't do what works now while working with OPS and improving all schools.
Right. Yeah, I read a book one time, and the basic premise of this book was that people tend to live up or down to our expectations of them.
Right.
If you don't expect anything of them, they'll live down to that.
Right, and the OPS needs analysis, I read it, 119 pages, right, which can be found on the OPS website. But I also went to the board meeting where they presented it. And the folks who presented that needs analysis were much more, sounded much more urgent in their vocal presentation of the findings than you read in there. And they made it very clear, and it makes it clear in this, that there is a crisis of low expectations in OPS, a crisis. And so, you know, some might say we don't need these charter schools because we'll improve all of OPS. Again, we can improve all of OPS, but when you have over 70% of teachers and leaders, and I'm certainly not blaming teachers. Some of my best friends, a lot of my family are teachers, not blaming teachers. But when you have politicians, and when you have superintendents, and when you have community leaders saying we got to solve poverty before we can expect better outcomes in our schools, that puts the low expectations on the teachers to say, guess what, Mr. Smith? We don't really expect you to teach these kids because, geez, we don't think they can learn. Well, then Mr. Smith turns around and has low expectations for his kids, and we're the ones blaming teachers. We have to change the message, and the message has to be every single child can learn. Every single child deserves a high-quality education, and if our current system is not cutting it, then we need to reevaluate it. And that's what I'm saying. 20 years now we're into this movement called education reform, and it simply has not hit Omaha as much as it needs to. And I've been looking high and low for it for a few years, and it has not hit here until probably maybe started a little bit a year ago, and the community in North Omaha lit it on fire last week by coming down to the legislature and saying, you know what, enough is enough. Our kids deserve this. Stop blocking what's working and give our kids a chance to.
And you know, if you have competition for traditional schools, that gives them more of an incentive,
right? Absolutely,
to improve.
Yeah, it's competition does fuel innovation, and I'll tell you, there's not a single. So I'm kind of a dork, right? I've gone to school, I've studied this, so I've looked at all the studies, because you get in this, and there's some people that do not want to see this happen, and I'm not here to talk negative, so I won't say what they're protecting, but they do not want to see this happen. So I'm thinking, wow, they're saying some awful things about people who like this, or they're asking me some weird questions, or her, saying people are attacking teachers or attacking whatever. There must be something I don't understand. I'm going to keep researching and find what's so awful about education reform. And I can't find the research unless it comes from one source, which usually ends in EA. But otherwise, I'm not finding the research, right, that says this is bad. And there is no academic research I've seen, and maybe I just haven't searched high and low enough, that says bringing in more school choice charter schools, for example, lowers the outcomes of the other schools. Now, there are studies that show it doesn't have much of a decent improvement, but then there is, and this is more because we're progressing in this, thanks to people like the Gates Foundation, big supporters of innovating and working with charters in the traditional district. And so there are examples, and Houston, Texas is a good example of it. Washington, D.C., Kaya Henderson has done phenomenal things there, and she's sitting there as superintendent, not saying, oh, we don't like those charters, or explaining why they're good and giving excuses. She's saying, let's all work together. We can lift the whole system up. And D.C., New Orleans, New York, now Tennessee, Florida, Indiana, those are places that have said, cut the excuses. We're going to all work together, get on the same page, put kids first, and their results are phenomenal. Now, some people might, if they're really into this and have heard all the terrible things, or just want to discredit this, might hop on to Nation's report card and say, you know what, Nebraska doesn't do worse than New Orleans, but this is what you got to look at. You got to look at where were we 10 years ago and where were they, and I'm telling you, their trajectory is vertical and ours is horizontal. So unless we change, we will be at the bottom of the nation. And again, we have a crisis in Nebraska with poor and minority kids, but it's not good for any kids. Now, there are some excellent schools. I would say in Elkhorn, excellent schools. In Wakefield, excellent schools. Some in Millard, some in Westside, some in OPS. There are individual school buildings that are doing great. But Nebraska is so tepid at adopting some of these reforms. They don't even want to ask what's working and where and how and why. Because well, then we might highlight what's not working. Well, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we figure out what's not working?
We certainly should. And quit doing what isn't working.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're running a business, if it isn't working, you stop doing it.
And education is a big business, right? And there's billions of dollars. In Nebraska, we spend over $3 billion a year. K-12, public schools. That's not even the money going into private schools, which is private money, but a lot of kids in Nebraska go to private school. We spend $3 billion a year. People in Nebraska are fed up with their property taxes, especially in rural, but also in Omaha. So we're spending that money. And then you turn around and say, okay, but like I said, other states are on a vertical trajectory for educational outcomes, and we are on a horizontal one. So we might have been above the rest 10, 20 years ago. By the way, we were spending less than the national average then. Now we're spending more, and we're not going up, and we need to go up. I mean, President Obama, race to the top, right? Race to the top. Nebraska's not racing anywhere except flat. And race to the top, it's, I don't know if, Nebraska is so divided between parties or what, but no one likes to talk about how George W. Bush and Barack Obama's education policy is so similar. But what I will tell you hear a lot in Nebraska is how they're both awful from the policymakers, right? No Child Left Behind, race to the top, that's awful, that's federal ed, we don't need that. It's like, well, we need something. And both of those policies focus on accountability, they focus on school choice, they focus on high-quality teachers, saying that's bar none the most important thing for a child in school experience is that they have a high-quality teacher. And in Nebraska, we're one of, not a ton of states anymore, that there's no alternative pathways. So if you are Michelle Obama and you want to come to Nebraska and teach a civics course for a semester in a high school, sorry, can't do it. You didn't go over to the School of Education and get your degree and do what we want teachers to do. So even though, we have at Benson High School not enough kids who are proficient in reading and math by 11th grade, I mean, the numbers are not good. We're saying we can't bring in the best math teacher, maybe a nuclear scientist or chemist to teach science, or, a Nobel laureate to teach English that would inspire these kids. Maya Angelou can't come in and teach a poetry class at Benson. No, because she didn't go through the traditional education system. And that does not, letting people like that isn't a threat to our existing teachers. Again, it's saying, look, this is what's possible. Let's all rise to the challenge. Let's set those expectations high for every kid, for every teacher.
That makes sense. It makes perfect sense. So why aren't we?
Because there are entrenched interests that do not want to see this happen. And
because they lose power, right?
There's power lost. There's money involved. There's a lot of, going back to the learning community, it's like, well, we really wanted that to work. We had good intentions, so we don't want, I can't speak for the people who created that, but the idea there was, we'll improve educational. Okay, listen, we admit schools in North Omaha, majority aren't doing so well, but they have 90% poverty, 95% minority at lots of schools. So how we'll improve those schools is we'll just take those kids out and send them to Millard, send them to Westside, and then that'll improve all schools. And that's just an interesting, instead of saying, what can we do in that school that's not performing to improve it, let's just send the kids out, treating the kids as if they're the problem instead of the system as the problem. And I think in Nebraska we may have been addressing the kids as the problem for a little too long, and so it's going to take maybe a little bit stronger of a push to say, time to focus on the adults in the system, including the elected folks, including the voters, including the parents, including everyone. But let's stop blaming the kids for not learning, especially now that we have around the country hard evidence. Look at Uncommon Schools, Achievement First, KIP Schools. I started this organization that I volunteer for with a teacher from Nebraska. He got traditionally certified in Nebraska, and now he's teaching special ed, by the way, which a lot of times you hear, well, charter schools don't work with special ed. I mean, I don't know, talk to the guy who started this organization, because he's a special ed teacher at a charter school in New York, a charter school that was just featured Friday night on CBS News with President Obama talked about black male achievement. The kids standing in the background, some of them went to his school, a KIP school in the Bronx. Phenomenal outcomes. And KIP school, I mean, that shows that you can scale this. You can take a model and say this can work for a lot of kids. They serve, I mean, it's over 80% minority, over 90% poverty, and those kids go to college at a higher rate than most kids in Nebraska. I don't care which school district you're in. So, and I can't stress this enough. We are in a crisis in Omaha. 2013 National Assessment for Educational Progress showed that black 8th graders in Nebraska, 2/3 of which attend school in OPS, perform worse on the math assessment than any other state, when you're looking at black students, than any other state in the entire country, but for Alabama, with whom we are tied. And that's just not acceptable.
No.
It's not acceptable. So we got to stop the excuses, stop the blame game, stop throwing up barriers, and just say, what is this going to take? Let's do it. Let's do it now. Act with a sense of urgency. And, you know, maybe what that took is folks from North Omaha coming down to Lincoln last week. Because I'm telling you, that's created a little bit of a buzz and a little bit of fear, right?
Right.
And so now people are opening up eyes that they kind of didn't want to open, possibly. But we just got to keep at it, because the forces against this are strong, they're committed, they're invested in maybe preventing this. So people gotta keep fighting. This is a fight. Howard Fuller founded Black Alliance for Educational Options. Is a great, phenomenal ed reformer. And I listened to a speech he gave this past year, and he just said every single day, this is a street fight. You got to fight for this every single day. Because our history in this country is not one where we put enough value on giving every kid, regardless of who that kid is, a high-quality education. And this didn't end in the 60s. It didn't end in 1968. It didn't end in the 70s. It didn't end in the 90s. It didn't end in the passage of the learning community. It won't end tomorrow. It won't end if every ed reform bill passes. This won't end. It's a constant fight, but people got to fight.
That's right. That's right. And something that kind of dovetails along with this is a rally that's going on tonight.
Yeah, so one of the women who I believe is responsible for organizing that bus, along with some other community members, let me know about this rally tonight, and it's going to be at the Tech Building. Let's see, you have notes right here. Starting around 5:15, leading up to a board meeting at 6:30. So tonight, if you want to learn more about this, if you just want to come learn about what high-quality educational options there are, where OPS stands on this, encourage OPS to be open and not preventing certain policies, come and just listen. I mean, it doesn't mean you support anything. It just means come learn about what's going on. Engage in the conversation. Right,
and that's at 3215 Cumming Street, right near the intersection of 30th
Old
and
Tech
Cumming.
High.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's at the Tech Building. So I want to say appreciate you coming here, Katie, telling us about this information. I hope those who are listening take away some things to think about, and maybe you can join in the fight to help kids get what they need.
All right. Thank
Thanks.
you.